Alrighty, this is my first Aristotle's Musings, and this is arguably going to be the longest one as well. We'll see how it goes. So, I want to talk about finding your why. It's a little bit of a unique topic, but it's honestly probably the single best thing that I did for my business. So, when I became a sales manager in 2021, I immediately started to read every book I could. Every book I could to make sure I didn't burn out like I did when I was studying philosophy at CU Boulder. I alternated between a book for work, a book for fun, a book for work, a book for fun. One of the better books I read was Finding Your Why by Simon Sinek. So Simon Sinek did a TED Talk in 2009. If you Google 2009 TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, it'll pop right up. You can't search for Finding Your Why, it won't pop up. He hadn't really distilled it down to that quite yet. But he ended up writing two different books on it. Start with Why, which is basically a sales pitch on why matters. And then Finding Your Why, which is once you bought into it, how do you actually find out your own why? So if you've already kind of sold on that, you can skip to the second one, Find Your Why. I'm sure he would not be offended. So his essential point is this. And it was back in 2009, so it's a little bit dated, it's a little bit grainy when you watch it, but it's certainly worthwhile. His point is this: the most successful businesses are purpose driven. And this resonates with a lot of different books that I read, a lot of different philosophies that I stumbled across. But his point is this: most companies, they start with what? They start with, hey, here's the product that we are offering. Here's the product or service that we're offering. They start with what? Then they might go to their how, which is how do they execute that? What is their process? What is their system? How is it different than everybody else? And then ultimately they might end up, if they're lucky, at their why, what their core purpose or belief is. And he cites this example of Apple, which is, look, Apple flipped it on its head. They started with why. They started with their why. We create unique, industry-breaking technology that will revolutionize your life. Then they started to go to how and their what. But they started with their why. I feel like they've probably gotten a little bit away from that now. When you watch these new latest Apple commercials, it seems to have kind of diverged from that original path. But he's not wrong. They definitely distinguish themselves as a industry disrupting business. And if you start with why, it changes everything. And I found this to be a very common theme in a number of different books that I read. Another of those books was Good to Great and Built to Last. Very interesting books. And here's the idea behind them. Jim Collins and Built to Last as well, Jerry Porras, they wanted to find out what differentiated a good company from a great company. So they found businesses within the same sector. They wanted to compare real estate companies to real estate companies and financial institutions to financial institutions. And they wanted to find out if they were given the exact same basic starting point, how did they differentiate themselves from their competition? And they looked at in Good to Great, a span of 15 years where they outperformed their peers by 3.5 times based on stock price. So very kind of scientific approach to this whole thing. And what they found was one of the big differences between good to great companies and companies that stood the test of time was they had that purpose. They had a drive, they had that core values, those core ideologies, and they stuck to them. They also found that the visionary brands, which was in Built to Last, they stood the test of time because of this as well. So core ideologies, core principles, core values can just completely change the way a business operates, fundamentally so. And when I say that, the initial inclination is to go, well, if they have a core set of principles, a core set of values, they're never going to differentiate. They're never going to waver from them. It's always going to be that exact same thing. How can they possibly adapt to the circumstances? And that's where Built to Last would say, look, the really good companies, the really visionary companies, or the great companies, what they did was they had a policy of and, not or. So it wasn't, hey, look, we want to expand and experiment, or we want to stick to our core values. It was and. We both want to stick to our core principles and values and never waver from those, and also experiment. be open to failure, try new things. And the best analogy they came up with, and they got a great diagram in the book, highly recommend it, especially good to great, was especially really, really good, was a tree. So a lot of these kind of companies, these visionary companies, they had the trunk of the tree, and that was their core values. And they would never, ever, ever, ever waver from it. It was what it was. They were never going to waver from it. If they did, they were destined to fail. And what they would do is they would start to go off in these different branches and twigs, and they would try out a lot of things, and then they would prune off what did not work. So still keeping the trunk intact. For me, in the lending business, I have to have my process nailed down from contract to closing. I need to make sure it's the exact same experience for everybody. If it's not, you don't know what you're going to be getting at the end of the day. And if you don't know what you're going to be getting at the end of the day, it does not instill a lot of faith or belief in me or my team. So we have to have that nailed down. Then, if we want to go in some different directions, we'll try out some marketing. An example that we came up with was when we do a pre-approval, we happen to get the age of their dependents. It's one of the questions that's asked on the application. The reason why is they want to make sure that if somebody's paying child support or spousal maintenance, how long is it going to continue for? That's the real reason. But for us, that was a huge data point. And one of my colleagues is like, well, what we do is if we see a child, what we do is we'll send them a Moving Day Berenstain Bear book. So I incorporated that. I tried it out. I decided to extend a twig, extend a branch, and give it a go. And the feedback we got on it was amazing. So now it's part of my process. Now I've decided to fold that into actually my trunk, and it's part of my whole process as well. So they have that principle of and, not or, and. You can both stay true to your foundation, your core ideology, as well as adapt, experiment, and embrace failure along the way, so long as it's not going to drag everything else down. And so long as it does not fly in the face of those core ideologies, those core principles. That is a non-negotiable for me. And it's going to come up time and time and time again. You're going to find that through a lot of these musings that they start to connect with one another. And that's not by accident. That's very much how my brain works. So Simon Sinek talks about flipping the script. Why resonates with people? What is your core purpose? What is your belief? That is going to resonate with people a whole heck of a lot more than your what or your how. How is it that you can get me into a house? How is it that you can get me into this mortgage? That's not going to resonate with people as much as why you do what you do. What makes you passionate? What brings out the best in you personally? When you ask somebody what they do for a living, you're going to get a very generic, kind of basic answer. What do you do for a living, Aaron? I'm a mortgage loan officer. That's a boring answer. I've got a colleague that when they get asked that same question, I say, before I tell you what I do, let me tell you why I do it. And they completely flip the script. They completely flip it on their head. What is it that you believe in? Why is it that you do what you do? The journey to finding your why can be very, very uncomfortable. Fair warning. And we're going to be looking at a couple different ways to kind of pursue it. Okay. So Simon Sinek's Finding Your Why book, highly recommend it. It's going to walk you through step by step. And not just you, but the other person involved with this process, which is somebody you're close to, but not married to. He points that out that's not great. You want somebody that's close, but not too close. You want somebody that hasn't heard all your stories before. Okay. But basically, the process is this. You take a sheet of paper, you draw a line across it. You're going to write your good or your positive memories above the line, your negative memories below the line. Just the ones that come to you off the top of your head, the ones that you remember from childhood. That one from high school where you're like, ooh, that makes me kind of itchy. I don't love how I reacted there. Perfect. That's the exact kind of stuff you're looking for. Those high emotional, high reaction points, you want to write that down. The more positive it is, the further away it should be away from the line. The more negative it is, the further it should be away from the line in the opposite direction. If it's, it wasn't a great story, but it's kind of put those kind of towards the middle, closer to the line, the neutral line. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to review your stories. You're going to go through your stories with that individual. And again, somebody that's close to you but not married to you is what they say you should do. I cheated. I went with my wife. It's not perfect, but it worked well. And their goal, and again, Finding Your Why book will walk them through their role in this whole process as well, is to pull out, distill the common threads, the common components to each of these stories. For me, a lot of my stories had to do with sports. That time that I was playing third base and there was a foul ball and I just went tearing after the ball, and I was living in Evergreen at the moment. And everybody's yelling at me, don't go for it, don't go for it. Because what I did not realize is there was a foot of mud about 20 yards wide that I was about to trudge through. But sure enough, I kept running through the mud, kept trudging through the mud, ended up catching the ball, and everybody stood and applauded. And, so a little kid caught a ball, woohoo! But for me, it was a big deal. Like, everybody was telling me not to do it. I did it anyways, and I succeeded. Like, that was a mind altering, core, memory of mine. I also remember when I worked at Subway, there was a very bad winter storm, and the owner's daughter was working there, and there was a coworker of mine, a football playing jock. I was a band playing nerd when I was in high school. Anyways, he was flirting with her. I decided to crawl up on top of the walk-in refrigerator and freezer and change the entire organization system for all their chips that they had. So I cleaned it off with, like centimeters of scum on top of it and dust and dirt. So I was up there on my hands and knees scrubbing off this that nobody asked me to do. It was just something that I thought was, okay, I'm not going to waste time. I'm not going to sit here doing nothing. I need to do something. I'm still like that to this day. I cannot sit still for too long before I have to do something productive. So got up there, scrubbed it all down, organized the chips, made, nameplates for where the chips went so everybody could find them. It was alphabetical order, of course. And I crawled back down, and the boss's daughter was like, wow, that was amazing. I need to tell my dad that you deserve a raise. And sure enough, I got a 50-cent raise the next day, which at the time felt huge. Again, a core memory of mine. And you start pulling out all these, common threads and common themes, you start to come up with your why statement. And theoretically, Simon Sinek says, your why statement should look like this. To blank your contribution so that blank. What is it that you're doing, and what is the impact that you're going for? You're going to, go through this process a number of different times. In fact, I would recommend even doing it with multiple different people, if you can. Ask your partner to create one for you as well with the themes that they pull out. Self-analysis is one of the hardest things you can possibly do. So you need somebody to help you out with this process. If you don't know somebody, make some friends. If you really need somebody, I'd be happy to listen to your stories. I think that sounds like a great afternoon. So anyway, start with your instinct, walk away, revisit it, and you'll adjust it later. Do not expect to come up with it right away. It's going to take you many, many iterations, many, many tries to really get it nailed down. But through enough time and effort, you'll come up with enough. Another route you can go, so that's the Simon Sinek route. Another route you can go is alkaline. We had him come into Elevations and speak to us all. He was great. He's actually a Boulder guy as well, so pretty neat. So Al's approach is to distill your personal life vision. Personal life vision, why, core beliefs, core values, all synonyms. We're really talking about the same thing here, I think. Al's approach is to distill your personal life vision by going through a list of core values. And I'll show you an abbreviated list. He's got the entire list in his book. Another solid read. This one was definitely a little bit more on the spiritual, religious side. Don't want to lead the witness, so try to leave my personal beliefs out of it. But keep that in the back of your mind as well. There's a couple books that I read where they definitely took a little bit more of a religious, spiritual tilt. So Simon Sinek was more of a logical, biological approach. Like, he actually talks about your brain and start with why. He actually talks about your brain and how it's also organized in regards to what, why, and how. He actually talks about your brain being organized in a brain. So he takes much more kind of scientific, biological route, whereas alkaline is definitely more spiritual. But some of those words that he came up with were, as you can see, charity, compassion, competition, effectiveness. You look through all these words and you start by circling all the ones that resonate with you, all the words that, kind of register with you. And then you're going to look for any of those words are very similar to one another. And if they are, maybe merit and money are very similar to you. Okay, great. I circled both of those. I'm just going to distill down into merit, something like that. And the goal is ultimately to get it down to 3 values. Okay. And then when you get down to those 3 values, you're going to ask yourself 3 questions. So how do you define this value? What would your life and the world be like if this value were more prominent and practiced? And then finally, are you willing to commit to a life where this value is paramount? Once you have these 3 values nailed down, you can distill a personal life vision. So that's his approach. Going through a bunch of words, you can actually do that one kind of on your own. Simon Sinek's approach, you definitely need to get some help. So those are kind of the two approaches that I keyed in on. But again, very, very similar ideas of trying to distill your core purpose, your belief. Now, the philosopher in me. So in philosophy, we studied the classic philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, you name it. So we spent a lot of time. It's funny, like when you look at what you got your degree in, you can only remember a couple things. Like one thing every philosophy student remembers is Descartes. Like it's just the one thing that we walk away with, right? So that and student loan debt. So in philosophy, the classic philosophers were trying to determine what made a good life good. Okay, they were trying to figure out what led not just to happiness, but actual flourishing and virtuous life. So more than just happiness. You could argue that happiness is the only intrinsic good. Fair enough, but they focused also on like a life well lived. What makes a life worth living? Okay, and they came up with this term, eudaimonia, and you'll hear it pronounced 100 different ways, but eudaimonia. Okay, and it was the idea of good spirit, a life well lived. How can you live a fulfilling, worthwhile life? To this day, we ask each other, jokingly, what's the meaning of life? Well, they were worried about that back then too. And apparently nobody's ever figured it out. So Aristotle, being the philosopher he was, and I feel like this is true when you look at so many different things. If you're saying, ooh, I have a headache, but you say that to a brain surgeon, they're like, ooh, you might have an aneurysm. We see things through our own lens, right? We see things through our own perspective, our own scope, with our own personal slant. Aristotle's slant was, I'm a philosopher. I use my mind. I use rationality. That's basically all I do, okay? So he determined that a life well lived is a life where the characteristic that defines your species is utilized. And since he's a philosopher, he's saying, hey, look, humans are rational creatures. We have the ability to ask the questions why. We have the ability to problem solve and do math. And we have, all this comes from rationality, right? So I think, Aristotle thinks, that a life well lived is a life where you use rationality to your best. Okay, that is his determination of what eudaimonia is. Perfect life, a life well lived, is a life where human beings use their rationality. That was his conclusion. So if he was looking at these three speed demons, a cheetah, fastest animal on land, a sailfish, fastest fish in the sea, or a peregrine falcon, fastest bird, fastest flying animal, he would say they are living their best life. If they could experience eudaimonia, it would be when a cheetah is in pursuit of a gazelle and when it finally takes down the gazelle, or a sailfish going through fish at 70 miles an hour. Cheetahs can also move 70 miles an hour. Thought that was interesting. Both of them lined up. Peregrine falcon, 240, by the way. Apparently friction matters. Peregrine falcon diving at 240 miles an hour and snagging that, dove or pigeon. His idea is, hey, look, they are living their best life when they are doing precisely that. When they are executing that thing that makes them unique to the best of their abilities. So my take, for what it's worth, is, and this is Aristotle, is the Aristotelian view is on the right track. I like the idea that doing that which is unique is what's going to give you the best life, is what's going to give you the best life. Now, I differ on, I don't think it's broken down to species. I think that's selling humans short. I think that's pigeonholing humans and saying, we're only good at rationality. What about compassion? That's kind of a unique human trait to a big degree. You don't see a lot of compassion in the animal world. What about, charity is kind of a human emotions. What? We're just going to completely discount that. Like, only focus on rationality. We're not going to focus on emotional capacity at all. Like, all of those are unique human traits. So what makes you the best version of yourself? What gives you the best life? I think it's a combination of all of these. I think it's a combination of finding that which makes you you. And I think you can execute it with the personalized vision or finding your why. And I think it'll help at least. And using that to the best of your ability. I think that's what really makes a life well lived. And it's certainly, and this is kind of the point of all this, is it makes a business a business. Every business, every brand is unique. And why does any of this matter? Why am I asking all these questions? Well, it's because if you're in technical sales, if you're a real estate agent or a lender, you are your own brand. You are your own version of your business. Like only you can operate your brand. It is your brand and no one else's. And the one thing that's unique of all brands is that they have a very defined core value. They have a very defined system, approach, why, purpose. Everything is very unique to them. You attract those you want to work with. It's not coincidental that most of the people you work with are very similar to yourself. That's not accidental at all. We attract those that are interested in our brand. So if you don't know your why, if you haven't really dug deep and looked into it, I highly recommend you do it. I highly encourage you to do it. I love how my dogs are just changing positions in the back. I highly encourage you to do it. It's a worthwhile adventure. You're only going to learn more about yourself. And honestly, that's a big part of what life is, right? Just being open to change, being open and vulnerable to learn more about yourself. Start with your purpose. It'll direct your how, it'll direct your who, it'll direct your what, it'll direct everything about you. And once you determine your why, you can build your brand from there. It'll change literally the entire way you create your business. So I hope that's helpful. If nothing else, I hope you got a couple good book recommendations. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Or if you want to go through the exercise with Simon Sinek's exercise, more than happy to do that as well with you. Yeah, appreciate you all, and I hope you have a good one. Thank you so much.